Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the amount of people in the West, and they're primarily sort of the under 30s age group, or people who haven't yet sort of had to have a real job and take responsibility for their lives. And then the people who've got sort of jobs for life in the public service or in academia and the teaching profession and so on, because they tend to be eternal children. But it surprised me about the number of people who according to surveys and polls, at least, this is, I wouldn't say exactly uniform across the Western world, but it's fairly close. It's within a range, between sort of 25 and 35% of the population believe that a communist utopia is eminently achievable and possible if only we do it better this time. There have been attempts made in the past, they concede, that didn't work out so well. But if we just do it a little bit better this time, then the communist utopia is just around the corner. Now, it's got a lot of appeal for certain people. The more childlike you are, the more appealing it is, because the more childlike you are, the less you're prepared to consider or accept responsibility or want it, and want the uncertainty that comes from, in certain uncertainties of life that come from taking responsibilities and having to sort of strike out on your own. So there's something very comforting, quite sort of maternal almost, about the idea of a socialist communist sort of utopia where everybody's equal. Now, it also has attractions for minority groups. I'm a black lesbian and I'm not equal to everybody else, so therefore I support a communist world, or a utopia where everybody's equal, regardless of anything, regardless of their skin color, their ability, whether they're lazy or hardworking, capable or not capable, stupid or intelligent, or I can be the same as everyone else in such a utopia. So there are certain people that are attracted to, Jewish homosexuals, for example, and Jewish activists generally are attracted to this idea of a communist utopia. Because then it's a world in which they will never be persecuted because everyone's equal, provided they are at the intellectual apex, though. That's usually a proviso that goes with it. And of course, children love, and schools and colleges, they promote, whether directly or indirectly, the benefits of what they claim or assert of the benefits. Everybody's equal. It's a paradise. And so again, the attractions. Now, if you look at this is the pre-Elon Musk days, so things have changed a bit. If you look at the Twitter sphere, that there was analysis done on it not that long actually before Mr. Musk took over, but the tweets were supposedly 70% of the tweets were left, or far left. And there was quite a small portion that was center left, and really the if you look at the sort of the center, 25%, 5% were far right, according to this. So 70% left, far left, 25% center left, center right, 5% far right. Now, given the predisposition of those doing the poll to find far-right Nazis everywhere you look, that if they came up with 5%, then you've got to assume, given how hard they must have been trying to find every far-right tweet that they could, that it's unlikely to be even 5%. It's more likely to be a small portion of that. But another question they asked was and again, the Twitter sphere at the time was heavily sort of left. So, but just over half those polled believed that communism or a communist utopia could have been put together and can still be put together if it's more effectively and efficiently executed. So let's have a look at that. Is a communist utopia possible. Quite apart from whether it's desirable or the practical reality of it all, but just having a look at that. Now, there were I think some very, very serious attempts at making communism work. Now, as an economic system, it's hard, if not impossible, to separate it from the communist ideology. So the ideology was, in particular, where it failed. On a pure economic basis, it's got its problems and its shortcomings, but the failures don't necessarily lie just in the economics. Again, even given those shortcomings. So I thought the Soviets made I don't think you'd have had, maybe the East Germans, if you want to look at those in post-World War II, but there was very definite attempts to create a communist society and a paradise. Now, I don't know that they really could have done any better under the circumstances, but the challenges that they faced were that because the ideology was running parallel to the economics, they were selecting people to put in the key positions, particularly central planning bureaucracies, those sorts of things. They were picking people who were ideological fanatics, because the belief was if they were sufficiently committed to the communist cause, then they wouldn't backslide or dilute or worse still, become counter-revolutionaries, deliberately attempt to sabotage or slow walk or subvert the communist planning processes. I thought the communists were rather innovative in some ways in trying to make it work, the communist system work. But looking at it, the failures came that because they wanted ideological fanatics, because they assumed that was first. You had to be utterly committed to the communist cause, and if you were utterly committed and your will was sufficient and intense and again your commitment was in the extreme, then the likelihood of success was pretty much, as they saw it, guaranteed. But the ideological fanatics tended to be the most moronic and the most sort of one-eyed and the most simplistic, and made the most simplistic interpretations of things and how it can work. And if something doesn't work, it's just because people aren't trying hard enough. That's all it is, without seeing the failings in the system itself. Now, because of this almost insane fanatical rigidity, they made sort of terrible mistakes, and mistakes that we would seem silly, because it was centrally planned. There were no success or failure signals that were being picked up in and transmitted, if you like, back down the planning line. And if they were so slow in coming, and there was a refusal of the fanatics to believe the signals. No, that's just the lies of counter-revolutionaries. That's bourgeois capitalists trying to undermine it. So we're not going to listen to that, and we're not going to take any notice of that. We're just going to put more people in prison, and we're going to kill more people, and we're going to interrogate more people, which is code speak for beat the shit out of them in a secret police prison. So they tended to respond that way. Now, eventually they would take the corrective action, but that could be years down the track, with years of failures and the disasters. But it doesn't take that many years of failure before the people start to look at it and say, this isn't really working. Okay, I'll go along with this. I'll pretend to go along, because if I don't, you'll kill me or put me in prison. But otherwise, I'm just going to sort of cruise along and try and go under the radar. But I've got no confidence in it, and why should I put my ass on the line for this bullshit? So it has a confidence sapping effect. And if you look at the Soviets, just after 70 years of communism, very few people really had any confidence in the system. They believed it was all an illusion. It was all propaganda. It was all ideological fanaticism rather than successful practical reality. But coming back to you look at some of these failures and the failures of the communist system, because when you're centrally allocating, again, you don't have those price signals. Now, in a commercial sort of capitalist thing, if you're trying to sell your tractor, for example, you're trying to sell tractors to farmers, and there was a huge state sort of collective farm sector in the Soviet Union. If you're trying to sell your tractors there, you need you need the farmers to say, yeah, I want that tractor and I want it in this format or that format. I want it with these sort of wheels, or I want the. So there was the production of the tractors was such that they would overheat after half an hour of operation in the summer, and some of their parts of wider Soviet Union, wider Russia, the different parts would freeze in the winter, and so there was really only a short time of the year when those tractors were usable. Now, if that feedback had come into to a capitalist manufacturer, say, gee whiz, we need a bigger radiator, or we need better airflow around the engine to stop it from overheating, or we need to have better insulation around the key parts so that things don't freeze, or we need this. And there was the wrong fuel was being produced for it, so the engine needed a certain type of fuel, which was in short supply because the fuel needed for most other stuff was a different grade, and the planners hadn't realised that to them it's just quantity of oil being petrol, gasoline being produced, and no one thought to think, well, hold on, does that gasoline work with that tractor engine, efficiently work with that tractor engine, or does it cause it to overheat? So these sort of things. Now, in a capitalist economy, they pick up on that fairly quickly. Hold on, we can't sell this until we fix this problem. And they would move quickly to fix it because commercially they didn't want that money tied up in an unproductive thing. But in a central planning bureaucracy, the plans are done, implemented, it's all sort of gone down the line. Now, if that sort of feedback comes along saying, look, we've got to do something about the overheating, then rather than address that issue, they can just say, oh, it's counter-revolutionary, it's bourgeois, it's enemies of the people. Enemies of the people are doing that. That's why their tractors are overheating. So rather than actually fix the problem, they can turn it into an ideological issue, which happened time and time again through the Soviet Union. So the system itself was deeply flawed in a centrally planned and structured economy. Now, I'm one of the ones who believe that actually came quite close to working if they could find a way of responding quickly to the price signals, and they didn't have the ideological fanatics there, but rather had capable people who were there to solve problems rather than simply execute an ideology. They could have done a lot better, maybe even succeeded, but they didn't do that. And this was, the merging of ideology and economics, I think, was the downfall, as indeed it'll be the downfall of the Western world now with the globalist ideology. It'll be ultimately the same thing, a different side of the coin. But because of the ideology that we have to employ black lesbians and this sort of thing, then the ability to deal with and solve in an organic sense problems through expertise and a preparedness to address realities, that's fast disappearing in the West in many quarters. And of course, it wasn't there in the Soviet, in the communist system. Now, the most efficient communist country in the world, or area in the world, was East Germany. That was considered to be the shining star, if you like, of the communist system. Now, unlike, say, the wider Soviet Union, Russia, that had vast natural resources such as oil and gold and things like that, which were able to if you like, soften or mollify the failures of the communist system. The East Germans had none of that, so they could only succeed or fail on the expertise and productivity of their workers and the organizational structure and these sorts of things. So because they just didn't have the raw materials and the natural resources like that. So they were the closest. Now, when East Germany merged with West Germany, the cost of bringing East Germany up to the standard, the technological, organizational standard of West Germany has been, they're still paying today, and it's been, the bill for the integration is in the multi-trillions. That's how far East Germany was behind technically and organizationally. Now, they had things like, well, we've got full employment. We don't have people living on the street on Skid Row. We don't have any of that. So we're a superior society. Well, they achieved that sort of 100% employment by artificially creating jobs. So the comment that I've heard a number of times from West Germans is that they employed people by having one delivery van and 10 delivery drivers operating on a roster. They'd work half a day each a week or something like that. So they were artificial, and the rest of the time they sat around scratching their bum. So they had these artificial job creation schemes where people just sat around doing nothing. Nominally they had a job and a title and an office to sit in or something like that, but really they only worked a day a week. Or another one I heard was they had 10 cleaners in the warehouse, but only one broom. So there was this constant mismatch between the tools required to do the job, the amount of people needed to do the job, and the job itself. And so people would sort of walk around pretending to work, and even the Russian workers said, "We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us," was the sort of comment. So in reality, there wasn't full employment, and if you'd made sure that only the people who actually had something to do had a job, then unemployment would have been huge. It would have been 40%. So in reality, the communist system was so inefficient, and because it had this thing that everybody must work and everybody has to consume through the centrally planned production of goods and services, then they had this hugely artificial employment scheme where 35, 40, 45% of the workers really didn't have a job. It was just a created job, and they had strange names, like they had the people, mainly women and clerks in factories, that would fill out the production reports, and they would have they used to call them economists. So they, so-and-so was an economist, because they filled out a production report saying that 100 tons of butter or steel or whatever it was made this month, this week, or whatever, and then they would give that to another clerk in the office, who would then compile it into a different report, who would then give it to another person in the office, who would get another report. So you might have a dozen clerks in the office all putting paper back and forth to each other, effectively saying the same thing, or a slight enlargement on what the previous thing was, but these people had no jobs. So because of this inefficiency, where you've got this job creation scheme in order to create equity, then there was this massive unproductive sector. So really the quality of life and the standard of living was very poor, because there was no productivity, and because there were so many failures in the system. For example, it was accepted that a quarter plus of the annual harvest of grain would spoil before it got to the cities or to the bakers it could be delivered to the customer. The reason being is there was this constant mismatch between grain going to the warehouses, the trucks available to move the grain, the storage facilities for farmers on the collective farms, the trucks then will transport, the trains, trucks, whatever, getting the grain then to the major distribution centres, from there into the cities and so on. There was an endless they never could seem to get it right. It seemed to get fucked up every time through sometimes it could be the weather. Other times the poorly made bridge would collapse and the trucks couldn't go, and so on and so forth. There seemed to be an endless array of problems. Now, we would look at that in disbelief. Supply chain strategists and planners may look at that in disbelief in the West, say, how could that have happened? That could never happen in the West, but and to some extent it may even be happening today. But given these things, the system was ultimately doomed to failure on an outright sense, but also failure on a relative sense. The West was doing much better, or the capitalist economies were doing much better than the communist economies in terms of the quality of the goods and services, the quality of life, and so on. Now, if you again looking at, they had to close down a lot of East German factories because the pollution was so great and the quality of the plant equipment so poor, the quality of the products they produced was so bad that they just couldn't keep them going. So they were shut down pretty quickly, and some of the pollution, the chemicals and the runoff that was going into streams and rivers, they had almost no environmental controls that were considered even basic in the West. So we look at the wider quality of life thing. The utopia thing is you had this theoretical social equality or equity, but you had a much lower quality of life. Now, some people who've come out in favour of the communist system, they somebody who's maybe they're low IQ, they've got no interest in politics or social affairs or anything like that. They just want to roll up to the factory or the office or whatever it is each day. They've got their buddies there, and they have a bit of a chat, and they drink their vodka and so on. They've got a 10-minute walk to the factory. They've got a 10-minute walk back again to their place. Sure, they share a kitchen and a toilet with a few other apartments on the floor, but so what? You get used to it after a while. It's no big deal. And they've got a television. They've got warm clothes for the winter. There's always enough food to eat. Maybe the food isn't so good. And sometimes the shops just run out of the stuff. But hey, if you want to, as long as you're prepared to wait in the queue for a couple of hours for a loaf of bread, then you're good to go. So as long as you accept all that, then no one's really better off than you are, or not many people. So you can still revel in this idea of equity rather than any of the other things. So the communist system failed on a number of fronts. Now, having a look at what could it have succeeded. So let's say it wasn't ideological, but instead it was people committed to making it work. What must we do to make this work? And so central planners would, as soon as there was any even a hint of a complaint about the tractors overheating in the summer, they'd be out there quick smart. The central planners would be out onto the farm, quick smart, and they'd be asking the farmer, well, what's happening here? Why is that? Okay. They'd bring a mechanic with them or a mechanical engineer. Okay, what's the problem here? We need a bigger radiator, or we need this, or we need that. Can you retrofit that to the? Okay, let's work it. Bang! I've made a decision. We're going to retrofit bigger radiators so these tractors can work in the warmer weather. And then we're going to go back to the factory and say, listen, you've got to modify your design at the factory level. When you're producing these tractors to have this or that mechanical feature or function change. If they'd had that quick response to things or response to issues like that, or hold on a minute, why is that grain spoiling in that way? Why are there's no shortage of trucks? Why isn't that? And then onto it and fix it. They could have solved a lot, maybe not all, but they could have solved a lot of these problems. But that wasn't how it was done. Firstly, they were ideological and not capable people, and we're seeing that now in the West, where ideological Western haters of straight white men are being appointed throughout all sorts of departments and functions in the Western world, and the problems, and I see it up front, up close, the problems that's causing are monumental, and it's permeating across the entire Western economies, and no one seems to give a shit about the destruction and the havoc it's wreaking on the Western societies at the moment. And the same was there. In order to go out and do something bad, you had to accept there was a failure or a problem, which meant either you or someone else or multiple people were to blame. Now, at the time, you could be put in prison for that, or you could be accused of being a counter-revolutionary or an enemy of the people. They could put you in prison for a long time or shoot you, and so on. So people were very reluctant to stick their head above the parapet on this. It's better just to quietly let it go and just make it so confused and murky as to who might be to blame that sort of nobody was, and it was a committee of thousands, and they couldn't arrest and kill everybody. So that sort of thing. So in the end, nothing was done about these for fear ideological, the fear. So if there was a non-ideological attempt at communism and there was people there that were committed to really making it work, then I think there's some possibilities. Would it work? No, I think the flaws are inherent in that you can't have an equity society and have an efficient society. You can have equity without efficiency, or you can have efficiency without equity, but you can't have both. So these starry-eyed dreamers that a utopia is possible, I don't believe it is. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.